somebody who received and is reading the System Club Letters book wrote me and asked if I would reveal my favorite copywriting books. And this is something I used to do at every system seminar, and I do periodically to members of the system for members of the System Club. Um, I consider this stuff super secret weapons. I mean, really, really powerful. And these are classic books. I'm sure there are some good new people writing copywriting books, but I haven't read one that holds a candle to any of the classics. And here's the most important thing. This is the big takeaway. This is 30 years of experience. The reason I was able to innovate so frequently and regularly in the early decades of the internet was because all I did was take classic mail order, direct mail, direct marketing, direct response, whatever you want to call it, take all that classic stuff and the principles behind them and apply it to the internet. That's really all I did, but nobody else did it until I did. But I was drawing from these amazing books. So let's go through the ones that I think are the most important. And by the way, there are hundreds of worthwhile books to read about copywriting and direct marketing and publicity and sales psychology. I mean, there's an infinite number of them. My recommendation is get started. And one will lead to another, which will lead to another, which will lead to another. That's how I found them. But I'll give you the best ones right now so you can start and get the biggest bang for your buck. First, John Caples, the legendary John Caples, Tested Advertising Methods. Were tested advertising. I can't remember. I don't need to remember. I've given you enough information to find it. Now, here's the key, and I'm the person that first was telling everybody about this, and now everybody, not everybody, but many people talk about it now. But if you want to trace it all the way back to the original person, you must find fourth edition or earlier. The fourth edition is the white cover with black letters. You do not want the quote new and improved fifth edition, which was produced after Caples died by some crazy textbook company. They absolutely ruined that book. So I don't know what that book costs. The fourth edition or earlier, I know it for various points in time. It was ungettable at any price. But I would say if it's less than $1,000, get it. Now maybe somebody's put it on in PDF and you can get it for free. I don't know. I got mine. Keep looking for it. If you can't find it, try eBay, of course, Amazon. That book is amazing. So if you don't know who John Caples is, and I would say only 1 out of 1,000 contemporary marketers does, you're missing out on one of the great minds of marketing. And he was an expert in something called two-step marketing, which simply means that you run an ad to generate a lead and then you follow up on that lead and close the sale. You may know this headline if you're a student of copywriting. They laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I played or whatever, it's something like that. He's the guy that wrote that ad. And what nobody will tell you about that ad is it was a two-step ad. That big full-page ad, its whole job was to generate a lead, to generate an inquiry. And then the real sales pitch started. And it came in the form of a booklet. I think it was 16 pages long, maybe it might have even been longer, but it was it was packaged as a prospectus, but what it really was, prospectus for a music school, a mail order music school. But what it really was a very powerful sales piece. So, when people say that, 16 and 32 page sales letters were not invented until the 70s and 80s. I'm sorry, guys, that's bullshit. They were doing it in the 1920s. And you know what? It would still work today. It would still work today. You put a 16 or a 32 page sales letter, not some goofy sales letter, a subtle, powerful, what I call the iron fist in the velvet glove. You put something like that into a prospect's hands, you're going to close some sales. So what I like about the Caples book is he from the 1920s until he retired, I guess in the 70s, was a long stretch of time. Uh, he he tracked the results of his own ads, inquiry ads, and he also tracked the results of his colleagues. And he worked at a big ad agency called BBD&O, and they ran gazillions of ads. So this is a guy who tracked the actual results of thousands and thousands and thousands of headlines over the decades. And if you know David Ogilvy, and I hope you do, if you don't, look him up and start reading him. Uh, David Ogilvy referred to John Caples, and it was something like, I learned that you could get, 23 times the response to an ad just by changing the headline. Now, he didn't mention Caples' name, but that comes straight from John Caples' book. So why David Ogilvy didn't give the credit to John Caples, I do not know. But that was the book that blew David Ogilvy's mind. And maybe he didn't want to give David Ogilvy any credit, because if you knew who, if I mean, excuse me, didn't want to give John Caples any credit, because if you knew who John Caples was, it would be hard to be that impressed by David Ogilvy. Not that David Ogilvy was a slouch, but John Caples was a giant. So the book is called Tested Advertising. I think it's called Tested Advertising Methods or something. It's very close to that. Um, and again, fourth edition or earlier, it's the white cover with black text. It's not the brown cover, the fifth edition and later. So not only was he a great copywriter, a real samurai, but he was a super student of the game, like very, very few people have ever been in history. And here's the key. Here's why you want that book. And here's why it's worth a lot of money. He gives formulas for how to write headlines. The reality is, when you're starting at this, you're not going to know what you're doing. And so it's really good to have a lot of formulas, plug and play stuff. Now, you don't want to stay at the plug and play level forever, but you definitely, paint by numbers, great way to start to learn how to paint, right? And then you grow out of it, and then you start doing some really amazing stuff. But you got to start somewhere. You got to start with training wheels. And this book is way more than training wheels, by the way. I mean, this book will really make you smart very fast. But what I love is that it's so basic. It's so foundational. And nobody's done a better job. Nothing's even close. Not even close. So that's John Caples. Now, everybody's heard of Claude Hopkins, and everybody's heard of scientific advertising. And I'm going to tell you, scientific advertising, it's okay, but the real Claude Hopkins book, the one you must read and study that book, is called My Life in Advertising. Caples already gives you all the rules. You don't need another rule book. It's always good to collect checklists and all that kind of stuff. But if you have the Caples book, you got 99.9% of all the fundamental foundational rule of thumb stuff. Again, you can always get more. I used to be obsessed by that stuff. Now it's all in my personal computer bank between my ears instinctually. And you may want to, gather more checklists and so on, but Caples has got the book. But that's only half of copywriting. Copywriting is a bicycle. It needs two wheels. So it's not just writing copy. It's also really understanding and thinking through what motivates your reader at a profound level. I said profound. I didn't say like thinking about it for 2 seconds. I didn't say, what's your avatar? None of that BS. I'm talking about getting deep into it. And it's a style of thinking. It's a way of thinking. And it's very hard to teach. It's it's an old-fashioned term called commercial instincts, and commercial instincts take time to develop. But if you want to look over the shoulder of a guy that had some of the best commercial instincts in the history of mankind, Get My Life in Advertising. He does not talk about headlines or ad copy or any of that kind of stuff. He might mention it, but it's not the main thrust of the book. He talks about how to understand the marketplace that you're dealing with and how to come up with absolutely unique, you know, bank account busting in a good sense, making your bank account swell offers. And that's really the essence of our business. The words that you use are about 20% of your success. Underneath that 20%, there's this big concept of the offer. What is it that you dangle in front of people to get them to respond? This is not easy. This is not cookbook. Um, it's something you're going to spend the rest of your life getting better and better at. I continually think about it. I continually study it, but you got to start somewhere. And the absolute best place to start is My Life in Advertising. He goes through case after case after case where he's confronted with a seemingly unsolvable marketing problem. And by thinking, and this is a hard thing to teach, but you can model it by thinking deeply and in a sort of a 360-degree way. It's like a Rubik's Cube. You keep turning the cube around until all the things line up. He would come up with the most ingenious solutions. Will you be able to copy them? A perfect copy of his technique? Maybe. I mean, maybe something will fit for your market. But the value of this particular book is just sitting around and hanging out with a guy that could think at a level that very, very, very few people have ever thought at when it comes to marketing. I mean, you're not going to find these people on the internet. I guarantee it. This is a whole nother level of marketing creativity. So get that book. It's not hard to find, and make that one of your absolute go-to books. All of these books that I'm mentioning are worth reading, not once or twice, but just reading them continuously until you get them into your bones. Next book that I'd hunt down, and nobody ever talks about this guy. However, because the internet is so vast and so much content's being created, I've noticed that some people have actually made videos about this guy. I haven't watched them. You can go watch them and see if they're any good. Um, Victor Schwab, Schwab. Victor Schwab. He wrote a book called How to Write a Good Advertisement. Sounds like a really sort of a plain vanilla kind of book. Uh, it ain't. It's really, really, really deep. Um, I believe that Vic Schwab actually was the ghostwriter for How to Win Friends and Influence People. I also believe and by the way, I was the first person ever to point that out, and now it's kind of spreading this awareness. It's a shocking thing because everybody knows that book. A lot of copywriters know Victor Schwab. Nobody realized that the style of How to Win Friends and Influence People is identical to Schwab's writing style. And he also wrote some of the ads for the book and handled the marketing, but I think he wrote the book too. I also think he wrote How I Rose Myself from a Failure to Success in Selling or through selling. Um, if you put those two books down together on one side by side and you read them, it'll be really obvious. They were written by the same guy. Uh, Dale Carnegie was not a good writer. You know that because you can read the books that he wrote before How to Win Friends and Influence People came out. And the guy that wrote How I Raised Myself from a Failure to Success had been a baseball player. Nothing wrong with that, but he had no writing experience at all. And suddenly he goes from baseball to becoming a really good person-to-person salesperson in insurance. And then suddenly this book comes out, written brilliantly. So in any event, Victor Schwab really had a huge outsized impact on how we understand selling. And again, as I look at this, I'm seeing that a few people are starting to give him some attention. But believe me, it's not one out of 1,000 uh, online marketers that even know this guy's name. So I would read that book. I would read How to Write a Good Advertisement. I would also read How to Win Friends and Influence People. I would also read How I Raised Myself from a Failure to Success in Selling. Uh, in fact, and let me give you a little secret. Gary Bencivenga, one of the great copywriters of all time, and his career kind of corresponded with the golden age of mass direct mail. Uh, he wrote for Rodale when Rodale was a real direct marketing company. He wrote for Boardroom when Boardroom was a real direct marketing company. Uh, and this was gladiator stuff. The very best copywriters in the world wanted these gigs. Why? Because you got a huge advance if you got the job and you got a royalty. He wrote one letter that I believe was mailed 100 million times because it was so good and it was so good. What do I mean by good? People ordered. And he got a nickel every time it mailed. You say, well, that's not much. A nickel. Multiply 100 million by a nickel and figure out what he got for one letter. But he believes, or for his money, the best marketing book ever written was How I Raised Myself from a Failure to Success in Selling. And again, I'm telling you, I'm pretty sure Vic Schwab wrote that book. So get into Vic Schwab. He's an old school dude. He's long gone. He's from another era, you know, but he was deep, as deep as Claude Hopkins, as deep as John Caples, and maybe even a better explainer of how to write great copy than the two of them put together. Vic Schwab, How to Write a Good Advertisement, and then the other two books I mentioned. More contemporary, I'm just going to give you two more books because why should I give you 100, right? Most of you aren't even going to read one. So I'll give you five. And believe me, once you've read these five, you'll not only have a fantastic foundation, you'll also have a great bullshit detector. And that was one of my secret weapons was I had read all the hardcore stuff, all the greats. And I didn't just, gloss over them. I studied them intensely so that whenever I would encounter somebody making a claim about their skills, um, if they didn't really have the skills, it was so obvious. I never wasted time on BS gurus. And by the way, in case you didn't notice, that's one of the skills you have to develop in this business because there's a million of them. And, they're pretty good at selling BS. So you have to have some kind of touchstone that you can compare the good to the half-assed, or you'll never get anywhere. All right, next one, Eugene Schwartz, Breakthrough Advertising. And you may have heard of this book. You may have heard of a lot of people talking about it. What you have to know is I was the first guy to talk about this book in the internet marketing world. And I wasn't the first guy by a couple of years. I was the first guy by a decade. Nobody knew who Eugene Schwartz was. Nobody was reading Breakthrough Advertising. Now, everybody talks about it. The value of Breakthrough Advertising comes in the first couple of pages, but it's good to have the book around. But you'll get 90% of the value. There's a lot of value in the book, but the big lessons come in the first chapter. Gene Schwartz was a giant, fantastic copywriter, fantastic entrepreneur. Pre-internet, he sold millions of books, and he did it via direct mail. I'll give you his big secret that hardly anybody knows. When he was writing for Rodale and Boardroom and all these other big, super giant direct mail publishers, he had a simple deal. He said, the payment I want is I want your buyers. So as soon as I'm going to write a letter for you, it's going to generate sales. Send me your hotline. And your hotline is the most recent orders, the orders that came in this week or this month. That's all I want. Now, why did he want that? Because he knew, think about the genius of this. He knew that if he had a list of known book buyers that were responsive to his particular style of copywriting, that he had a license to print money. Now, if you don't understand what I just said, rewind the tape and listen to it 10 times. He was shooting fish in a barrel and letting somebody else bring him the barrel, the water, and the fish. He made millions of dollars. How many employees did he have? Well, he must have had a team of, 5, 10, 20 people. Nope, just him and a secretary. And he must have worked, himself to the bone. Well, he worked pretty hard, but he had a lot of time to become a scholar. He was a legendary biblical scholar, believe it or not. And he's one of the greatest collectors of contemporary art. And he wrote books on how, all kinds of self-improvement books for kids on how they could become better students. I mean, he had a rich and full life, and he didn't work himself to death doing it. And he didn't have a cast of thousands to do it. He just had his office and secretary to, deal with all the stuff. And he would just crank out letters, acquire books. And by the way, he was always making unfamous, not totally obscure people famous overnight. That was his other great skill. So he put his best thinking into this book, Breakthrough Advertising. And I think after you read the first three books that I suggest, uh, and then read the other Schwab books too, then you're ready for Eugene Schwartz's Breakthrough Advertising. Don't expect to understand the whole book on the first reading. It is rocket science, but it's really, really good and really, really worth reading. Another book that I like a lot, and this is a guy nobody talks about in the online world. They still don't talk about him. Um, but maybe a few more people talk about him since I've been talking about him for over a decade. It's probably way more than a decade now. That's a guy named Dick Benson. And he wrote a book called, I think, Secrets of Direct Mail. And you may say, well, I don't do direct mail. And I'm going to say, A, you should learn about it. And B, anybody that can do direct mail, internet is a joke. It's so easy in comparison. It's like, well, if you can do direct mail, you are an MMA fighter. And if you get into, a dust up with some random dude who's untrained, that's the comparison between direct mail, the old classic direct mail people, and internet marketers. You could take a great direct mail person and he could clean up, and many have on the internet. You could take the greatest internet marketer who ever lived, and he'd be lucky to survive his first mailing. Honestly, this is how it works. So Benson was the genius of geniuses when it comes to direct mail. All the big companies would go to him to get advice. The big direct mail companies, direct response publishing companies, like Boardroom and others, they would go to him to figure out how to do it best and how to survive and thrive. And the book's a really simple read. Maybe it's the book you get before you get the Eugene Schwartz book, but it's just filled with this kind of wisdom that you can only get when you've done something for decades at a very high level. In the internet business, for example, there aren't many people that have worked at it for decades because the medium's still not that old, right? But Dick Benson was somebody that had, by the time he got around to writing this book, he had about 40 years of high level battling under his belt. I mean, he was the best of the best. Didn't write copy, but he knew how to set up the deal to make sure that what the client was doing was going to be profitable. Remember, the copywriting is just the tip on the spear. It's the icing on the cake. It's not the cake. What is the cake? I'm going to give you the biggest secret in marketing. The cake is arithmetic. You've got to know your numbers, and you have to do things that make numerical sense. And I'm telling you, having been an advisor to, I guess it's hundreds of people, could be thousands at this point, the number of people that can grasp that simple concept are few and far between. The ones that understand it do very well. The ones that don't understand it flounder forever. The ideal direct marketing person, and I use that term direct marketing a lot because that's what the internet is a combination of a salesman, which is the copywriter, and an accountant, which is the person who can count. If you can have, and when I say count, I don't mean, you sit around and do drudgery all day. I'm talking about somebody that can just lay it out. Like, here's what we're spending. Here's what's coming in. How do we do better? How do we get more value out of the people that are in here? That's an accounting question, which then gets solved by a salesman, right? But it's the accountant that's forever driving that issue. And I have just given you the secret to the business. And ask the people at the very highest levels, right? Is there more to know? Of course. But can you succeed and thrive without those two simple understandings? You cannot. And Dick Benson was the greatest at these kinds of this kind of calculation. So the 5 books, and there's some bonus books from Schwab. The 5 books are Tested Advertising Methods by John Caples, 4th edition or earlier. My Life in Advertising by Claude Hopkins. How to Write a Good Advertisement by Vic Schwab, and you might as well read his other books. Now, other people have their names on these books, but he wrote them. How to Win Friends and Influence People, and How I Raised Myself from a Failure to Success in Selling. Get those books. Then I would get Dick Benson's The Secrets of Direct Mail. And then after you've been through that, now you're ready for the rigor, the rocket science of Eugene Schwartz. However, I will tell you that 90% of the value of that book is in the first chapter. Not that the other stuff's not valuable, it's just that the stuff he lets loose in the first chapter is so amazing that you can build a super business from just the insight in the first chapter. So those are my 5 books. Those are the ones I would get. They'll make you really smart, really fast. They're books that you can read over and over and over again, and they will make you pretty much bulletproof and immune to all bullshit, because these are the guys that really, really knew. And if you're hearing something from some newfangled, newly hatched expert who doesn't sound like these guys, you know that that person's not worth following. So 5 books, start with 1. My campaign, my program when I was educating myself is I would read first thing in the morning, 20 minutes, and I'd read last thing before I went to bed, 20 minutes. And within a week, you got a couple of hours under your belt, and within a month, you got a lot of time under your belt, and within a year, you've got a PhD, honestly, PhD understanding of the fundamentals of the business, which will pay you. It'll pay you better than any effort you can put into anything. So hope you found this useful. Go out and get those books, develop the habit of reading. Maybe some of these are on audiobooks, but you really want to be reading this stuff.